Yeah, I don't even know what an interview and gather looks like in a recording form. We've hung out here and chatted before, but I didn't know you could like make a recording out of it or whatever.
Yeah, I mean just like recording the screen and stuff.
Okay.
So the idea is that I mean it should be like um you can share your screen and everything, and I think it's gonna look cool. Like it's a like a metaverse type
Yeah, for sure.
thing. Let me let me just fix this so you can see your face. All right, so cool. So people can join from the chat, from the nerd chat. You could share your this link to the Bill Guild too if they want to ask any questions and stuff.
Okay.
They can just pop in and we can do a little Q and A.
Okay. What's the theme? Like, if I paste it in, what's the theme of the QA or whatever? Like,
I'm
what are we kind of talking about?
I'm going to pick your brain about scaffold mostly
Okay.
because like I've been using it a lot and I've been like promoting it to other people and I just want to see if my take on it is correct and how to optimize that because I think it's like a really cool like neutral language for people. Like if everyone knew how to scaffold, we would be in a super cool place where you can just share your builds and work together. So I'm like trying to get my friends who are like, I want to start developing smart contracts. I want to start making stuff. I just tell them do the speed run. Like do the speed run, man. You have to do the speed run, and you have to like deploy this a thousand times to know how like the bits and
Yeah.
pieces work. And
Get the
only
habit of shipping.
yeah, like it has to be second nature so that you can like understand the inner workings and stuff. So yeah, I mean that's sort of what I want to touch on with this because I think
And I
it's
can just copy paste the GatherTown link
yeah,
into
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
done. Pasted it to the profile. We'll see if anybody checks it out.
Awesome. Yeah, I also wanted to talk about how the whole build guild is structured because I kind of discovered it by myself, but I think it's a very cool way of like having these quests for people to just learn stuff by themselves, right? I think it's so cool what you've built.
Like async.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and the whole system for like submitting your bills and stuff. I think it's something that a lot of people should try and copy for like because a lot of what we have to do to get Web3 out there is to get good learning tools, right?
Yep.
And a lot of it's like super dense and also there's like I like for example, I think there's a lot of components people could specialize in, right? There's like there could be guys that only
Protocol it.
right, and also like there could be people that only do subgraphs, you know, like
Token lists,
right,
subgraphs. There's
right.
all sorts of infrastructure there that even just like running your own node. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
if I would have gotten started with the build guild earlier, I would have created a lot more infrastructure. And I just have a guy that I know that has like three different nodes in three different data centers for all the different clients. And anytime I
Right,
just tap him to like get a new node or something like that.
right. And also like and then the I've been trying to get people to build stuff together, right? To have this
Yep.
like the il- build guild itself is super cool because people are sorry, it's a tongue
It's
twister,
tongue
right?
twisting.
Yeah, it's that happens to me with like stuff I name. I usually just read it in my head, and when I have to like tell people about it, I realize
Yeah.
it's much harder.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or like even like people's names, right? Like
Right.
pseudo anonymous identities, and then when you meet them in person, you're like, "Oh, do you know so and so?" And you completely butcher their name because
Yeah,
it's always been this. Yeah,
yeah. And in your brain, it makes complete sense, but
yeah. Like your name could be Atox, or it could be ATZ, or it could
yeah,
be ATOX,
right,
Atox Dotty. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
You can say
I'm just
ATOX.
sharing my screen. You can
Yeah,
talk and see that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
So
I'm gonna
for
unshare for a little bit.
okay, all right, awesome. Yeah, so let's start from the top. Really, like,
Yep.
how did you get into Web3? Like, what's your experience getting into Web3?
So I got into Web3. Well, I mean, like for sure, I thought like there was money to be made. Like I think
Hmm.
that people who kind of come in and say it's all rainbows and coordinates and they weren't trying to make a buck doing it. Like they're probably lying to you. Like the fact that money is at the protocol is super powerful, and there's this really interesting decentralized tech. But
Hmm.
take all of that and multiply it by I can get paid for my skills
Right.
in a higher way, right? So
Yeah. Go ahead. Go
that's one thing you have to just put that disclaimer out there. That, like most people who get into this space probably think that there's money to be made, and they're kind of like trying to apply these cool skills that they have to make
Computer.
an app that let you orchestrate Docker clouds
Go ahead.
first locally, but then into it was called Captain, I think is what it was called. It let you build like infrastructure, decentral, or just like basically infrastructure and code locally, and then it let
Hmm.
you deploy like cloud software, and it helped us as a team scale up. We kind of pushed the team toward microservices, and then we built this infrastructure that allowed them to make small microservices locally and then deploy them at scale to our cloud. And
Uh
the company that I built that for was like, no way we're going to open source this. So like 23 people ever used it, and it's probably still being used now at that company, but like it killed me that we couldn't open source it, because I know that like tons of organizations could use that same thing. And then eventually like Kubernetes and a lot of other things came along.
Right.
But sadly, I was down the Docker rabbit hole when Ethereum came out, so I totally missed it at first.
Okay.
But then I got in and started just building like anything I could. Like I built like I saw that the Oracle problem was interesting, and I tried to build like an Oracle exploration. But this was really just like a learning this thing called concurrence. It's like totally again when you go in trying to make money, you think it's all like a big thing. But really, it's just like this was me learning,
Uh huh.
and it helped me explore, you know, how Ethereum worked, how to
Right.
create, scripts and deploying a contract and contract to contract interaction. And I basically like learned in public, but like no one was looking at this. So
Right.
I was still kind of learning in the dark. And I
Right.
thought like, okay, like there's a gigabrains out here that can totally like do this shit way better than I can, right?
Mhm.
Like I'm not gonna come up. Austin is not gonna be the guy that comes up with it. With all the like, crypto economic incentives, right?
Right.
So then I started thinking like, what can my smooth brain do? And it was art and gaming. And I built this
Right.
thing called Galliast,
Oh,
where you
did
kind of
did you put
scale
that?
around.
Did you put that
No,
on
next
block
time.
art? Is that on block art?
Oh yes, block art. I did a Gallias. Yes.
Oh, that was yours.
Yep. So Gallias is this like resource management game
Mhm.
where you deploy these little ships, and they sail around, and you catch fish,
Uh huh.
and you can sell the fish to the fishmonger, and all these different land tiles are smart contracts, and it's
Awesome.
all hand painted. Like I painted it like on oil and canvas, pictures of it, but everything's also on chain. Like the clouds move
Uh huh.
with each block that gets mined. So it's like
Wow.
super heady, like way deep dive for me into what blockchain gaming is all about, and we're seeing that kind of in like. Have you heard of Dark Forest?
Yeah.
Amazing
Yeah.
tool. So they use a lot of these similar concepts where you're using burner wallets to sign lots of transactions without having to hit the user with a bunch of prompts. You're using meta transactions to pay their gas. You're using ideas where like when you send this ship to sail, you see this little ship sailing here. Each time a
Mhm.
block gets mined, this ship will move one speed basically. It's not moving. I think RPC. Oh yeah, the RPC endpoint is dead. Yeah, they just killed it, I think. But if you could see that, you'd see them moving. But this movement works the same way in Dark Forest, where you basically make a single transaction and you say this ship is moving in this direction at this speed.
Uh huh.
And so a lot of like early gaming things came through that. But okay, so going back to the question, how I got started, I was definitely like trying to make money and try to build something that was interesting.
Mhm.
I then backed off and tried to build something that only I could do that was beautiful. Really, neither of those things resonated with the space.
Right.
But the third thing I did was take all that knowledge of building and create like a toolkit, and then start showing off that toolkit. It was called Clevis, and no one really cared about Clevis either. But the fact that I was building and showing off tutorials, that
Hmm.
really resonated with the space. So I got into this space basically by education,
Right.
teaching folks how to build shit, teaching folks what meta transactions were, teaching folks what burner wallets are, and then eventually getting into like ETH build, where you can kind of create this. It's like a sandbox for builders.
Dude, I remember that's one of the first videos. That's one of the first videos about blockchain that I ever saw. That,
That's so cool, dude.
uh
I love
huh.
doing that.
It's insane. Like when I started learning about how that stuff worked, like this video made it all like really click in my head. It's such a
Awesome,
cool tool. Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
One.
So, go ahead.
No, I was just saying +1 on the whole
Oh,
build, clicking everything in the head. Fucking great technology.
word. What up, Alex? How's it going, man?
What's up?
Yeah, so then I was just building like tools, and really this tool, the main reason for this tool is just to be able to. Oh man, I can't get the screen share. Is to teach other people.
Hmm.
Like there's this whole, there's all these other like, hash functions, key pairs, transactions, encryption, Byzantine general, all these
Yeah.
other, like blockchain and transaction and gas. This is just a good way for me to teach it, and I can even like like draw some shit. Be like,
That's
hey,
awesome.
let's go over here. Yeah, yeah.
That's so
So I built that
crazy.
tool for that, and that's when I started like getting a lot of traction in the space, and then
Hmm.
that eventually leads to scaffold-eth and more stuff that we can talk about. But I've probably been rambling about my introduction for too long.
No, but that's such a cool story, man. I mean, I love how you've self. I mean, you had all the right tools, right? Because you were already building crazy stuff beforehand. But like, I really like your path, and it really shows how it should work for most people. Like, of course, like no one's gonna be like everyone's gonna be different because they bring different tool sets, right? Like for example, I studied medicine, right? So I don't really know how to I didn't really know how to code that well. Like I did like machine learning stuff that like taught me stuff, but I was like really not uh starting to learn like software design. And I mean this path of discovering how it all works, I think it really shows like how anyone can do it if you have the right tools, right? And every time someone does it, it leaves the trail, right? That people
Yeah.
can follow, and you've created like signposts, right? Really for people. I mean, that.
You get to like a tent, and it's like someone like holds your hand and gives you a wet towel on your head,
Yeah, I mean,
and it sits down in the air conditioning, and it gets out a chalkboard and
yeah.
starts writing things.
I mean, you came through with a machete, and it's way different now. But that's great, and then I mean, this whole experience led you to create the build guild, basically. And so, how is that structured? Like, let's start talking about that because I think it's a great example of how a community should be built on chain too.
That's awesome. Yeah, I almost have to share my screen to like, but like, there's kind of like these two ideas that you alluded to there. The first one is like leaving the campsite better than you found it. Like when I would go camping with my dad when we were younger, you would go to a campsite and there would be like a little bit of trash, and like after you're done, like make sure that campsite looks better than you found it. So
Right.
like that concept paired with the concept of if you really want to learn something, you have to teach it back to other people. So
Right.
so learn by teaching and leave the campsite better than you found it. Kind of both of those things multiplied is kind of what I'm going for with Build Guild, where you're going to come into the space. There's so many complicated things to learn. Get in and go learn how they work, and then kind of like create a README, create a tutorial, create a
Mhm.
video that teaches people what you just learned, but in a better way. So
Mhm.
when they search for it, they find better content. And just like if we keep doing that, and there's like kind of this passage of time and washing
Right.
away of things, then hopefully there's just like tons of good content because of that.
Yeah, and also like that's the point of scaffold, right? To create this language that we can share, um,
Yeah.
like a common ground on.
So structure-wise, you've got scaffold-eth. To kind of like dive into your question about Build Guild,
Hmm.
scaffold-eth is like a tool, and I can do a quick demo of scaffold-eth in a second, where you
Hmm.
can edit a smart contract and you can play with it in the front end. but at a high level, scaffold-eth is a dApp template, right? It
Hmm.
has hard hat and a bunch of components and a bunch of libraries that make it really easy for you to learn and tinker with Solidity. Look at that ETH price in that screen. Scaffold-eth helps you kind of at first, like when you're writing early Solidity, a lot of times you'll create an only owner pattern, and then to test whether or not the owner can get in or not get in, you have to write like a complicated test that says, do this as the owner, now do this as not the owner, and then make sure it fails as not the owner. And you're ending up writing more tests than you are Solidity,
Right.
just to test to make sure that your assumptions are correct.
Right, and it's also super abstract for the layperson, right? Because
Yes.
like
It's like, what the heck is going on?
right, when you deploy stuff, like you conceptually know it exists on the blockchain, but only when you front end it, it really like creates a concept in your brain.
Exactly. So if I create some owner here and I go ahead and deploy this with scaffold-eth, you're going to see the owner show up in the front end, and it's going to reflect whatever changes you make, right?
Mhm.
And so then if I create a require statement here that says that the message.sender has to be equal to the owner, if I could spell owner, and then say not the owner, and then go ahead and deploy that. See that I'm getting into this like pattern of making small changes and shipping it to production and then testing it, right?
Right.
So let's test that only the owner. Like, hello world, the owner should be able to set this. But then if I open up an incognito window and I come into localhost, I'm going to have a different address, right? I'm going to have a different burner wallet in the top right.
Mhm.
Like, honestly, all of my history has been built into this. All sorts of stuff. But now when I say hello, this should fail, right? This should, as coming in from this guy versus this guy, if I click this, it should say not the owner, right?
Right.
So basically, I just like in a visceral way tested it and physically proved it to myself using a front end instead of writing a test bed, right? And that's so much more. It's a quicker iteration loop. It's so much more valuable for you to see that visually. So that was kind of the start of scaffold-eth. But the goal isn't just to iterate on your smart contract. Once you get your smart contract built, you have this like all these handy components, things like addresses where if you click on it, it takes you to the block explorer, and like a single place in the app to change the network. Like if we change this network to Rinkeby,
Yeah, that's it.
now all of these addresses, and then it's done, right? Now the app is on Rinkeby, and all of these addresses now link to the Rinkeby Etherscan. Just like little things like that make building apps way better. We kind of like built into this. So it's not just about tinkering with Solidity. You tinker with Solidity and you get it done, but you can even like build tons of like production level applications with this because it handles a lot of this stuff for you, so it's a lot easier.
Right.
Yep, go ahead. So basically should we do the build guild? Like I can kind of like illustrate like the layers here. So it's like scaffold-eth is the tool, and as we started building the tool, we realized that like this was going to be a tool for starter kits, and more starter kits would come out of this, and there would be, there's been 2.3 thousand forks of it. There's hundreds of branches of how to do different things. So after I had the starter kit and people were building apps with it, that's when the build guild came in. The build guild is, let's see if I can spell build.
Biddle.
Build guild is basically like an incentivization layer around that process of creating starter kits and leaving the campsite better than you found it, and teaching people to learn, right? So like the best way to learn is to teach people. So what I do is I try to bring in developers. I have them use scaffold-eth, and I have them build tutorials, prototypes, products, apps, anything with scaffold-eth, and I'm streaming ETH to them.
Awesome.
And this was like, I'm streaming a lot of my own ETH. Like I was taking off my Uniswap shop, converting it to ETH, and then locking it up in smart contracts and streaming it to developers. And then the developer kind of creates their own profile here where they're shipping all these interesting projects and withdrawing ETH for it. And so Build Guild is like my incentivization layer. And then kind of on top of that, something we built, and I think we talked about it earlier, is Speedrun Ethereum. And then this was like the smooth path to get in. So it's kind of like this is at the bottom. Like this is the first touch point of Speedrun Ethereum.
Right.
Then you learn scaffolding, then you get into Build Guild.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, in this whole process, for example, I did it by myself, right? I learned about scaffold-eth through one of your videos, and then I started doing the speed run. I think I did half of it, and then I got bored, and then um, so the way I use this is that I wanted to fork a protocol, right? And usually all the protocols have their smart contract stack, but they don't have any front end, right? And you don't have any good way of like testing the deployment, like what I talked about, like this concept being super abstract until you have a front end to tinker with. So it's hard to learn a protocol without a front end, right? So what I did is that I basically git cloned the protocol GitHub into the hard hat folder, and I use that and I use that to deploy uh, the thing on testnet, and it worked. And so I started iterating a lot with it, and I basically could get myself to write a full production app with like subgraph, the front end, like the whole thing functions, just with the scaffold stack. And
I was going to try to copy the web contract and just paste it in here, but that's exactly right. You can just paste in a contract right here, and then just get that front end view. You could get this interface with any contract, and that's what you did.
yeah,
That's cool.
yeah, and then the whole like deployment setup, because I then had to like play with the oracles to get them to work right. So I had to deploy maybe 200 instances of different contracts with names and stuff. So the back end, like grabbing the new deployments and putting them on the front end so I could test them all the time, really like reduced my development time so much that I could like get that done within a month, and I think that that just speaks to the power of the tool, and 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 this whole thing makes sense as like a way to, because the whole thing I did is open source, so someone else can grab and make a better front end, and then get a better version or whatever. So it's a whole new way of working together, and then you as a cartel of builders who all share the same language have a really strong like ability to create really complex stuff, right? So
Here's a good example of that. So we were, let's say you're thinking about building a Gnosis Safe competitor or a multi-sig as a service. Like first of all, like when you go through the speed run, like challenge 6 or so is building your own multi-sig wallet. But what you can do is just grab one that's any of these builders have built. And guess what? Like everything's going to be in the exact same spot, right? You go to hard hat, you go to contracts, here's where your contracts are going to be. You go to the app, and the app works exactly the same on every single scaffold you build. If you want to put that same app, we were just talking about that, like it's on mainnet. Like if you want to put it on a different network, you just go in here and select that and change.
Yeah, it's super easy.
Yeah. So there's like thousands of forks, there's hundreds of different branches, and all of those have, the hard hat right where you know where it is, the React stuff right where you know where it is, the wallet stuff that abstracts it away so you can use burner wallets at first and then connect MetaMask when you need to. So there's a ton of composability there, and just like a cartel of builders is a good way to put it. You can get one person and you can teach them scaffold-eth. And then if they want to build a DEX or they want to build anything else, there's all of this stuff, and it's very native to them in terms of how the tool works and where to go to tinker with things. So you can give them any of these different jumping off points to go learn and build new things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the premise, right? And the whole thing.
Oh shoot, I wasn't sharing my screen there.
That's fine.
I was showing off this multi-sig here.
Let's see that.
Yeah. So there we go. So this is like, if we go to Build Guilds builds, these are all the builds of all the builders that have gotten at least one like. I can go to multi-sig as a service, and I can go to a live demo, right? And I can deploy my own multi-sig on whatever network I want, just like a Gnosis Safe. But I can go look at the code too, and the code's going to be set up exactly how every other scaffold-eth project is, right? There's the project, hard hat, contract. Sorry, I'm reiterating this, but I was sharing my screen earlier. So
yeah, that's fine.
There's the front end, and it's here, and here's where you would change your network. So just like, yes, a shared stack is definitely our superpower, and trying to have it as open source as possible and as forkable as possible has created this like Cambrian explosion of all these different apps that are using the same kind of framework.
Right, and the fact that it's all EVM like everywhere,
Yep.
it's
I'm an EVM maxi.
same. Yeah, people tell me like I want to deploy stuff on Solana. I'm like, no, 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 thanks. I don't do that. But so thinking forward, right? Because you have this huge framework, and it's basically a net for people, right? Uh, and and there's like a pattern forming where, for example, there's build guild, right? But I just talked yesterday to Creator DAO, and they are doing a similar thing, sort of, but for content creation. So, like the way I see the space forming is a bunch of different specialized cartels propping up and having like discrete functions, right? And collaboration between those cartels is what's going to drive the space forward as products. That you have a much stronger pipeline if you can have like a bunch of decentralized organizations where like widely specialized in this stuff working together, right? Um, and in
It's
that's
the idea of like compounding pace that happens. It's not just open source. Like open source is good, but
uh
hella forkable.
huh.
There's
Yeah.
a difference between being open source and being hella forkable,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
And protocols are open source, but damn, it's hard to fork them and use them. And they want it. They don't want it to be easy to fork, you know.
Yeah.
But when we create a multi-sig that's like hella forkable, we see all sorts of things come off of that.
Right. And that's the thing that in this space you have to design for composability first because you're never going to be able to keep the pace, right? And for example, you look at Uniswap forks, and they are so prevalent in the space that it's really hard to move forward from that design because everything else is built with that assumption, right? So,
Another good example of that is just like if you're thinking about building a game in this space, like don't be like me and try to build Gallias, which is like this full-featured game. You should be thinking of a composable element of all games, and you should build that really well.
yeah,
Like a loot bag or a map generation system, or some kind of small thing that helps just with all Web3 games. Knowing that identity and inventory are going to follow you from game to game, build a really good inventory system, right?
right.
Don't build a whole game, like build a composable element and do a really good job of making it forkable and easy for other game builders to extend.
Yeah, and that's like a great premise, really, because I was thinking the other day about like, for example, have you played Elite Dangerous?
My little brother has, and he's told me about it, but I never got into it. It's like Escape Velocity used to be back in the day, fully 3D.
Yeah, it's like fully 3D space sim with all the bells and whistles. Like it's just as if you were in space, right? I've played the VR version. It's dope, right?
Oh, like with the
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
pretty cool.
yeah. It's insane, but then everything else about the game sucks, right?
Well,
So
look, you can't build that game on blockchain because it's gonna have like an inflation economy, right? And
right.
that seems like really like you're
Yeah,
gonna have to have war and everything blowing up, so
yeah,
there's
yeah.
gonna be an economy that has to prop up the war. And if you don't want to build a game that's gonna do that, then it's gonna be hyperinflationary.
Right, right. And then like the other thing is that I was arguing with people on Reddit on the Ready Player One subreddit, and I'm like some guy saying that he wanted to like make that happen, right? Like how could he use his time to make that happen? And I'm like, get into Web3, and the comments started flaming me, like, no, Ready Player One has nothing to do with blockchain, and I'm like, the only way that you can farm like first person shooter kills and then buy something with that is with blockchain. Like we're going to this future where like everything exists on the same server, so you have to make stuff composable. So, like the future game is not going to be one company making a game, but like this Voltron of stuff that people use, right?
Yep.
It's gonna be. I mean, let's hope. And the only way to make it is with stuff like Build Guild, right, where everyone's using the same sort of platform to code, so interpretability is even easier.
Hopefully.
Yeah,
I
and
mean, a good example of really open-ended composable game mechanic would be when Dom created Loot. Then there's not even a front end for that, right?
right.
This is kind of like an opposite case where he was popular and he built something that became popular, and you had to like use Etherscan to do
Mm-hmm.
something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably like kind of an opposite. But if we were to say like, okay, how many things got built on top of Loot? And actually, probably quite a few things did, but they were all like somehow they were trying to make money.
Right, right, yeah, yeah. You know who did it better? Android did it better. He did he,
Uh,
Andrew Cronje did Andrew
oh
Cr-
yes, yeah, yeah,
he did his own version on Phantom, right? And the thing is that there was no money involved because the NFTs were free to mint, but you had to level them up every day. So you had to show up and mint a transaction every day for them to level up, and it got harder over time. So I think that by now, like 99.9% of people who started leveling those guys up are gone. So the guys who are left have these super high level characters, right? But the thing is that what Android did is that he incentivized people to build front ends for the game. So there were like a lot of different front ends built for the same game. So you had this really cool experience where they got more sophisticated. So they had the prompts for the quests and they started like doing like generating images and stuff like that. And that's like the first inkling of what real Web3 games are gonna look like, right? And I was actually thinking the other day that you should do a scaffold for like
like games.
more like games like a scaffold for a 3D interface. Like
Oh yeah.
have you ever looked at Mozilla Hubs?
Mm-mm.
So
Hubs.
yeah, Mozilla Hub, like the Firefox guys. So they have this stack which is called Hubs, which is like VR. So just like Web 3, there's Web VR, right? It's this whole concept of like going past to the interfaces and building like a web based, like a 3D based internet, right? In that in that sense, like I've always thought that having a web, like the ability to add blockchain interaction and smart contracts to this would be super interesting, right?
That's cool. This looks neat.
Yeah, and
It's
it's
like
so
if you wanted to create crypto voxels, right? Or
right.
crypto voxels. If you wanted to make crypto, why?
Yeah,
How do I spell crypto voxels?
yeah. The crypto voxels are cool. They're called voxels now, actually, just
Oh, it's
voxels.
just voxels now. Okay. Oh yeah. Dope.
Yeah, I have one of those.
Yeah, I have a couple.
But yeah, but the difference between like the difference between hubs and voxels is that there's two ways to like frame a metaverse, right? And one design is like what Sandbox and voxels do, which is like a shared server, like a shared game server. But this is more like website based design where each world is like a website, and
Okay.
you can like
That's fun.
you can hyperlink the websites, right?
That's cool.
So this works in that sort of fashion. And the idea is that in my point of view is that this is going to be like a layer of metaverse on top of the shared ones. So people sort of like, if you have a voxel space, it sort of would link out to your hub space, which is like your private server space in which you can do a lot more things, right?
Yeah. We're let's see. I have this builder within the build guild who's creating this like universe generator.
Hmm.
Let's see if I can find. Oh wait. Let's go to build guild. I was gonna say I can't find him. There we go. He's making this universe generator that it generates the planets and like the suns, like different sun sizes, and then
Uh-huh.
planets that rotate around them. And you basically just generate them as NFTs at first, but then the NFTs can be extended, right? It's a very like loot like build where we're basically paying the gas to put the universe on chain,
Right.
and each one of these planets has a size and a distance from the sun,
Hmm.
and 6 different resource levels. But like he's not gonna be very prescriptive about that. He's just gonna deploy it and see if people extend it and use it. So this is something I'm really excited about, like how we deploy this and like use this as a game and have other people extend it. And I don't know how to build a good open-ended game to give to the community and let the community take over.
you
It's a
should
tricky thing.
you should do like build guild raids where you have like these overarching objective. It's like
Yep.
it's another name for a hackathon, really, but
Yep. Yep. We
but
do more just like internal hackathons for sure, just to get everybody building stuff. And again, like going back to the fact that we all share the same stack, it's gonna be super easy to just like one guy picks it up and runs it for a week, hands it off, someone else picks it up for another 2 weeks,
yeah, and
someone
like
else forks it and makes something new.
yeah, and it's super, and that's the best way to like have junior people get a whole lot of experience with a project. And like I think the most important thing is like knowing that there's teams that you can join, and that's a lot of like I I made my own DAO, which is NerdDAO, right? And it's a lot more casual. It's more like a Telegram. It's based instead of based around the like a GitHub. It's based around the Telegram chat, right? So it's more like social stuff and discussing about crypto and whatever. But the idea is that we could run like a building team and have people join and like learn the ropes and get the skill set to fork off their own stuff and just grow the network that way. In that sense, I think there's a lot of stuff that we could do, fun things like we could do like weekly hangouts here and just build stuff. And there's a lot of space that we could thread.
I'd like to see more like funding for this kind of stuff too. Even just like funding of public goods in general. Like
Yeah.
space isn't great at it. Like we're trying and we're trying to use these new coordination mechanisms to make it work, but in the last bull run, we didn't see a bunch of like developer programs blowing up and developers getting paid for their work.
Right.
It was a lot of, one or two developers forking a protocol and getting rich.
Right.
Not like systems to bring more developers in and to pay them for building cool things. And I think we can build those same things on blockchain. It's just there hasn't been as much, traction there, I guess.
Yeah, and the thing is that a lot of it comes down to the fact that we are not good at being popular.
Like humans,
Yeah, I mean, I've tried, and I am not that good at being popular. Like I've tried. Like I know some guys. The thing is that like crypto attention is a popularity contest at the end of the day, and
Yeah.
and I think, for example, what we're doing here is going to help a lot in getting the narrative in the right place, right? Where because a lot of the problems in crypto come from like people having doing uninformed decisions, and the people who actually have a good take on things not being heard because it's not.
Quiet.
Yeah, and if you have a cartel of people, like for example, if the bill guild is not in favor of something, that's not the same as an individual, right? And I think the power of communities can be really levered in. I mean, we have to learn to do that, right? And a lot of it is like building the right incentives and like then talking about like showing them to people, because like we like to think that we can just deploy stuff and it'll work, but you also need people to know about it, right? Because it's like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did it really fall? The answer is not unless you pump it, not unless it.
Right. Speculation is always like part of it. Yep. I think that so yes, speculation is part of it, and you have to learn that speculation is actually helping us. And I remember getting on a lot of calls with a lot of people who basically completely threw out all of Web3 because of the element of speculation. And yes, it's bad, and yes, we have things like ETH pumping all the way up to 5,000 and going all the way back down to triple digits, and that like being devastating to developers that are holding this token.
Yeah.
But on the other side, that speculation brings in a lot of people. It gets a lot of eyeballs. It like it does help drive the industry, and it's something that it's kind of like a double-edged sword for us. But what I want to dive into here is something that you talked about. I think I saw it on your Twitter or something, and it's something I talk about a lot, and it's incentives.
Hmm.
If we correctly program incentives into these systems, we will basically like urge people towards certain decisions and behaviors.
Yeah.
And that kind of like mechanism design is very, very powerful, and also like one of Ethereum's superpowers.
Right.
So like even though there is the speculation, there's also this like incentive design and this money at the protocol that's like very, very powerful. So the speculation is kind of like double-edged sword, kind of sucks, kind of cool. But the incentive design and the mechanism design is like so super powerful.
Yeah, and the thing is that, like, for me, like, the whole premise of me getting into crypto is, like, I come from healthcare, like I said, and I'm, like, trying to understand the current situation of our society, where there's a lot of stuff written about, like, anxiety and the epidemic of people just not feeling that well, and there's, like, general dissatisfaction about the current state of things, right? And if when you look at it, it really comes out down to incentives, to like crooked incentives, right? Like, people who are in the government have no incentives to make people who are not in the government's lives better unless they're being lobbied against, and then a lot of incentive to work is being diluted by inflation. So of course people feel despair, right? Because the incentives are fucked, and people hate money because they see that, because money at the end of the day is just an incentive, right? It's just your incentive to do something. And the problem is that it's so badly designed that it makes people miserable, right? And the whole point about Ethereum is building these incentive mechanisms that make people happy and make people want to collaborate and make people want to participate. And the structure that you've built on the Build Guild is sort of post work, right? It's not, no one's working for the Build Guild, right? You don't have employees, but you're making a lot of work. And you're paying a lot of people, but you're not expecting them to do anything for you. You're rewarding them for stuff they already made. So it's a much more healthy cycle where you can actually extrapolate that for more people, because like I said earlier, there's a lot of different cartels that you could join. And when we get to gaming, just by playing games, you're playing these incentives that create money, right? So even if you don't want to participate in any of the building stuff, there's always going to be a role for someone to, like, make something out of their time, right?
And this incentive design is super low level. It's like, there's only hundreds of builders coming in and seeing scaffold-eth and build guild, and so it's easy for me to design incentives around that because they're smaller. If we think of a bigger system and we think of more like recycling, like if a government created a smart contract system that rewarded recycling in a way where you got a token for recycling, then like you're designing these incentives to get people to recycle, but you almost can build more around that. Like whoever recycles the most has some agency to vote on local politics or something
Right.
like that. Like weird things you can build into a system that you couldn't do before. They're really exciting. And when you talk about people like being mad at money and being mad at the government and being mad, it's because they don't have any agency.
Right.
If they had more abilities to affect change in these systems, or think about how the system could be designed better, it's going to completely change their mindset and hopefully behavior, and help them change the minds and behaviors of other folks.
Yeah. And it's something that you readily see on, like, I hear this story over and over where people are like, I quit my job for crypto and I thought I would work less, but I ended up working 10 times more. And it's like, of course, because you have self agency, right? You're self directing your work, and guess what? People want to work. Like, the whole premise of that people are lazy is not real when, if you have a goal and a reason to move, like, there's nothing that can stop a motivated person, right? And
This kind of brings up like UBI, and I think that the Build Guild is kind of like developer UBI. I'm not streaming a lot of ETH, right?
Right.
I'm streaming like a half an ETH to a lot of builders, and like you could barely survive off that and sit around and play video games and smoke weed if you wanted to. But like eventually you're gonna want to do something else, and hopefully that's what kind of a system, a UBI like system would lead to. Is like, sure, you take a couple weeks to do that other stuff, but eventually you're gonna get bored and want to go build something, and hopefully we can motivate you to build more.
Yeah, and the thing is that if you have multiple systems like this going on, then you can be a part of a lot of things that make that because all these incentives are meant to make you do stuff that improve that leaves the campsite better, right?
Yep.
So, for example, if you would just like to recycle stuff for a week and get paid for it through a smart contract and just drop your job as a CEO for a while and just think about stuff and pick up trash, like like the idea is that you have all these options, right? And don't feel constrained by, like, don't feel tied to all these commitments that the society makes you think that you have to take in order to exist, right?
Yep.
So it's a lot more it's a lot more existential, right?
But I mean, there's, in terms of giving people agency, hopefully it becomes more real. Even if it is existential, hopefully you feel like you have more agency and you see some kind of light at the end of the tunnel in terms of, like, I can actually write a smart contract that has the correct kind of game design to it that will bring in the folks that I'm worried about or I want to impact, some change on, and give them agency to do the right behavior and get kind of rewarded for that right behavior.
Right.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, it's big picture, and it's kind of like it's still out there a ways, but I think that like we're starting to see glimpses of it. Even like I talk about this, and it's like way. This is more like bong rips and video games. I think that like the product market fit for decentralized apps goes all the way to like a nation state level.
Oh yeah.
We talk about like coordination games. We're talking about coordination games at like a nation state level. Something that, like, right now you could have a company be a wrapper around an idea, and it's big enough that
It's transnational.
big enough it has plenty of players, right?
Right.
But as soon as we talk about like nation states arguing about something, or we're talking about billions or trillions of dollars of assets and war and soft and hard power and all this other stuff that's like way bigger than any one company, and these like smart contract apps and something that could run on a network that no one controls and
Right.
everyone can trust starts to be the substrate that perhaps we could deploy these apps on that could be played at a nation state level.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying, and I think that it's sort of built from the bottom up, like from structures like Build Guild, and then them coalescing into larger and larger groups of people, where you get more representation of more people, as you create these meta networks, right? And they're transparent all the way through. So, like, for example, the stuff that ENS is doing with their DAO, and it takes a lot of time for, like, because I think that at the end of the day, Ethereum is an organization layer, right? And a lot of like a lot of it is what emerges from the smart contracts. Like, for example, I think one of the key things in the next 10 years is going to be what's it called? Um, their token has a stupid name. This PNK.
Oh, I don't know
It's the arbitration platform for.
it. Okay.
So they basically build a
Arrows?
what? Claros. Yeah, Claros. So the Claros platform has this, like, system for arbitration, right? So if you have these, like, huge problems, like who's responsible.
On a human level.
Yeah, right, right. So because what you're seeing right now, for example, is a lot of, like, governance being misused and abused, and, like, a lot of people just assume that because they have token power, they can just decide to do stuff. But I think that a lot of like the maturity of this space is going to come when protocols can submit decisions to arbitration, right? Like the
And it's kind of sad, like when we look at that, or we even talk about this, it's led by it's a token, and here's what the token is. And when I Google Claros, it's like here's the chart of the token. Like
right.
we need to get to the point where these are like valueless NFTs, and the NFT says that you have some governance right. I think this leans toward optimism, and how optimism is experimenting with governance around having their token house, but also having a citizen house.
Right. The users.
Holders are voting, and they're not particularly whale bags. They're people who are particularly interested in seeing the platform do well. Give those people an NFT that gives them voting rights, and it has nothing to do with token rights. It has everything to do with how to make the platform work well.
Right. And I think that we are coming into this time of a lot of experimentation because this is something you can really test in a compiler, right? How governance is going to play out because it's more about the interaction of people with the tools that you set out. And I think that a lot of experiments are being like are happening in real time, and that's a lot of the virtue of forking stuff and trying different setups. But I think we're gonna trend towards like more sophistication and like what you're saying with two house governance, and then what happens when you have disputes between protocols, right? How do you solve those? And then you have like another layer, and then what's the interaction within the larger crypto ecosystem and the legal system, right? What if we need a unified stance on proof of work or proof of stake mining or whatever? How do you record? And a lot of what's happening, like people don't like to this notion, but when you do a proposal, like any government proposal is like legal precedent, right? So you're setting up behavior or templates of behavior for future projects to walk on, right? And and this is something like as it emerges, it's so the thing is that it's so new that we need a whole layer of people just to understand what the fuck's going on, right? Because there's not enough people. Like I think a lot of like the big thought leaders are still thinking in Web 2 terms, and because you can't really talk about this unless you're experimenting in real time, right? Unless you're part of a DAO and like understanding how people react differently to these mechanisms, right?
Yep. Yep. I totally see a lot of like Web 2, like even when a DAO is trying to build a thing and they have all these like freaking stand-up meetings and KPIs, the DAO only wants one developer building it, and it's inefficient if two developers are tinkering with the same thing. But in a DAO, in a decentralized open source world, you're going to have lots of different paths. So
Right.
it's going to go far slowly rather than going fast.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
I better dip in a second. I think Blind Nabler and I are jumping on a call next, so I don't have to send him a message saying I'm going to be late. But we ought to wrap up so I can jump on with him.
All right, I'm gonna
Unless he wants to pay for the demo too, that works.
well, yeah, I mean, I think this has been a super great chat. I'm gonna post this on the YouTubes and stuff and on the tubes. Yeah, and let's just keep this conversation going. I think that we have to just make more things happen and grow our tribe, you know. I think that's the most important thing right now. All right.
I'm down.
Cool. So thanks for coming, Austin, and I hope to see you soon. I'm gonna dip.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
AT0X.
Whatever, however you want to say it. I say Atox.
All right. Awesome. I got it right then.
Yeah, you got it right.
Having me.
All right, thank you, man. All right, see ya.